evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. It's been 6 months and a day since Election Day and more than 100 days with Joe Biden in the Oval Office. The 2020 election is over, history. And yet barely a day goes by without Donald J. Trump continuing to whine about the election he lost by more than 7 million votes. But more than that, he's still pushing for election recounts, and not the kind you're thinking of. Like, for example, this recount, still ongoing in Maricopa County, Arizona. It was ordered by the Republican state Senate, and rather than being run by election officials who did their own recount last year, this one's being run by a group called Cyber Ninjas, whose CEO thinks the election was stolen from Trump and has said so publicly. That group, again with the bizarre name Cyber Ninjas, then went to court to keep what it's doing secret, in part because the Cyber Ninjas have zero experience running recounts and because the company expects to get contracts to do similar recounts in other states. So the 2020 election never really ends. See if any of this gives you confidence in the Cyber Ninjas. Observers had to sue to get access. They're broadcasting images like these online and on conservative media. And they're looking at people's actual ballots, unsupervised, with ultraviolet lights and pens the same color that voters used. So they could be tampering with those ballots, the evidence they'll probably use to claim that Trump won in Arizona. And then there's this guy and his interest in the Arizona count. He's reportedly obsessed with it, asking about it multiple times a day, talking about it constantly, even turning a wedding he crashed at Mar-a-Lago into a recount campaign stop.
Let's see what they find. I wouldn't be surprised if they found thousands and thousands and thousands of votes. So we're going to watch that very closely. And after that, you'll watch Pennsylvania and you'll watch Georgia and you're going to watch Michigan and Wisconsin and you're watching New Hampshire. They found a lot of votes up in New Hampshire just now. You saw that because this was a rigged election. Everybody knows it, and we're going to be watching it very closely.
Again, that was a wedding at Mar-a-Lago. But the never-ending quest for 2020 Trump votes is really only part of this story. The other part is the ongoing Republican effort to work the rules to their favor, restricting the vote so they can win the next election, or rather to stop Democrats from winning those elections. While at the same time, Democrats in Congress are working on a bill to expand the vote, there are night and day differences. On early voting, Republicans in state houses are restricting early votes in larger counties, expanding it in smaller, more Republican-friendly ones, and limiting Sunday voting in places, typically big early voting days for African-American communities. Democrats want to expand early voting. On voter ID, Republicans want strict ID requirements for absentee ballots, just like most Republican states have Election Day voter ID laws. Democrats want to loosen voter ID requirements. Same thing with absentee mail ballots. GOP wants to make them harder to get and use. Democrats want to ensure people can vote absentee and set rules that states must abide by. Plus, the Democratic bills would do all this. They'd make it easier to register, plus voting rights for released felons, limiting purges of voter rolls, independent redistricting, and more. While the GOP's state laws are all restrictions like these, including no food or water to people online and giving more election power to state legislatures, Republican-led state legislatures. Let's bring in our first guest to discuss. Professor Paul Gronke teaches political science at Reed College. He's considered one of the nation's foremost election experts. Professor, let's start with this recount underway in Arizona being conducted by the Cyber Ninjas. First of all, should we be even thinking of this as a recount? Just how different is this from traditional recounts?
Well, Cyber Ninjas, unfortunately, is a firm that was part of this sort of disinformation campaign that was going on after the election, calling into question the results. So they're not really a credible actor here. People who conduct these recounts have great deals of expertise. Typically, it's the state or local election officials. In fact, they have processes in place. Maricopa County, where the ballots come from, has conducted an audit of the election as well. So, look, they had to get these ballots out of a secure location. They had to transport them, which is not supposed to happen. It wasn't even clear that this Arizona Senate had prepared for secure locations to store these ballots. So this is not really a recount. Unfortunately, it's more political theater. It's very sad to see this still going on now, months after the election has been finalized.
Would you be surprised at all if they announced that they found lots of errors, or if they announced that Trump actually won Arizona? Do you think that's their aim here, that they can somehow change Arizona's electoral votes from the 2020 election?
Well, I think the aim during all of this has been just to kind of sow mistrust, even though they say it's in response to lack of confidence. The confidence was created by sowing mistrust. So I don't think they're going to find these kinds of changes. The positive parts is because of the pressure of folks like you, other media actors, other nonpartisan groups, we can view what's going on. There's webcams we can watch. So, I don't think there's anything shady that's going to happen here. It's an enormous amount of effort to count on over 2 million ballots. I think they're finding that out, but I don't think they're going to go so far as try to declare Trump the actual winner. I don't think we're going to find it. There's going to be some mistakes. There always is with millions of ballots, and these are going to be trumpeted. Hey, 3 ballots were miscounted, but that's just not going to change the outcome.
I think you may have hit on something here, Paul. Republicans keep saying that they need these recounts and all of these voter restriction laws all over the country to build back confidence in the electoral system, even though, as you said, it was Donald Trump who did the lion's share of the work to help erode that confidence. Last weekend, we heard Trump at Mar-a-Lago saying he wants similar recounts in lots of other states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, New Hampshire. It feels to me like this is going to decrease our confidence in election systems. Do you agree? And do you think that's their goal?
We're in a very tough situation when Cheney, the second in command in the Republican Party in the House of Representatives, is calling out Donald Trump for promoting what she called the big lie. The big lie has some deep historical roots, so the viewers should look up what the meaning of that term is. When Cheney is using the big lie and she's being excoriated by her own party for asking her party to accept the outcome of the election, which, by the way, let's remember, Republicans did very well from just below the top all the way down. The only place they did not do very well was in the presidential election, which was lost, and Joe Biden won. So many states, I can't say how many, but many states, more and more every year, are moving to a post-election audit process where they use statistical sciences to make sure that the results that are reported are credible, people can have confidence in them. I encourage viewers to contact their state and local election officials. These are the experts. They're the ones who know what's going on. Look, the politicians have self-interest. Let's keep that in mind. The election officials, their interest is just having an election that everyone accepts. So that's where people should turn. And yes, these efforts are just a constant kind of, I don't know if they're trying to sow distrust. What they're trying to do is make Donald Trump feel good about himself. He was the president of the United States. He's hanging out in Mar-a-Lago. The guy feels good enough.
I want to shift now to these state-by-state voter restriction laws that we're seeing, the most recent one in Florida. Is there a potential tipping point in your mind, a sense that the GOP could go too far, that could generate backlash against the party, actually help Democrats?
I think so. What has happened traditionally with these kind of laws, it's difficult to figure out the vote suppression effect of some of these laws because groups are able to mobilize in response to them. Stacey Abrams in Georgia, the best example of someone who got so frustrated after a loss to now Governor Brian Kemp that she got organized rather than being frustrated and angry and staying in a resort in southern Florida. Stacey Abrams organized, and this is what I would like my Republican friends and colleagues to do, rather than trying to suppress the vote. Organize, get these new groups into the electorate, and organize and try to win their votes. So I think there's a real danger to that. Look, this is a weird kind of obscure one, but not for people who cast ballots by mail. Drop boxes. Drop boxes are convenient. They're very secure. You can have cameras on them. I think if they get rid of drop boxes all over the place and make it difficult for people to get the ballots back, people are going to get frustrated. And I think there's going to be a lot of groups that are going to be mobilizing against those laws.
But then again, the impact of those laws will be in place. How big of an impact do you think those voter restrictions will have? Will they cost Democrats congressional seats and electoral votes?
I think that's not likely. Again, it's very difficult to figure out exactly what the impact is because groups mobilize so successfully. Right now where we are, so there's lots of litigation going on. There's litigation in Georgia. There's litigation in North Carolina. There's going to be litigation in Texas. So I think we're going to be fighting this fight out in the courts. Unfortunately, not where it should be. Right. Again, the battle should be over getting the voters to support you. We shouldn't be battling over the rules and trying to use fairness or unfairness as a political strategy. So I don't think it's likely to happen. But look, these elections are coming down to, just very tiny margins. And that little margin may make the difference. So I guess we're going to see in 2022.
As you know, there are a pair of Democratic bills languishing in the Senate right now that have passed the House, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. In your opinion, would they counteract what state Republican parties are trying to do in state houses?
So I like both of these bills. I think the more likely one to pass is the John Lewis Act, which essentially deals with Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. What happened with the change in the Voting Rights Act is the formula that was in place really had not been updated for decades, and Congress really needed to update that formula. So that, I think, is fairly reasonable. It's sort of a statistical formula, historical formula. Is there a history of some groups being disenfranchised by your laws? John Lewis Act is a very big act with lots of pieces to it. Some advocated to break that apart and not have so much in one place. But the John Lewis Act, what it would do is it really standardize procedures. It would mean that you would move from state to state, or in each state there would be sort of a floor. It doesn't set a ceiling, it sets a floor. So there's a certain floor for a certain amount of early voting, a certain amount of no excuse absentees, a certain amount of drop boxes. Voter registration is standardized and sort of smoother, cheaper, more efficient. So I really like what what both of these bills do. I think they standardize procedures in ways so voters know what to expect. And look, the two parties then fight it out in the electoral arena. Not in the election law arena, but in the electoral arena. And that's where candidates and parties should be battling.
Finally, Professor, if those bills pass, you'll have state laws saying one thing on voting and federal law saying something else, which seems like a court case that's just destined for the Supreme Court and its 6-3 conservative lean. Not that it would necessarily matter to the current court, but how has the court ruled on these kinds of federal versus state election laws or issues in the past? And should Democrats be worried about that?
Well, this is an area of constitutional law where I am not an expert. What's going to happen is that federal law is predominant. And so the question is going to be, are you sort of be able, as a state, able to navigate within the limits that are placed within H.R. 1, S1? Are there space within those limits that, a state is supposed to have a minimum number of drop boxes? They're sort of pushing against that limit in some way. So it will be litigated. What I hope most state legislatures do is bring their laws in conformity with the federal law. And as I say, I think it sets a floor. It doesn't set a ceiling. It doesn't make you have too many drop boxes. It doesn't, if you want to be more expansive, you can, but let's set a baseline so people can have some sort of expectation in American democracy about what the voting rules and voting access is. But it's going to be litigated. Lawyers, they're always making a lot of money on this, right? There's lots of ways for lawyers to make money, and this is another one.
You and I may have picked the wrong professions. Paul Gronke is a professor of political science at Reed College. He's also the director of the Early Voting Information Center. Paul, it is always a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much.
More politics ahead on RFL tonight. We're going to spend the next couple of segments talking about the challenges facing each political party. We'll start with the Democrats and what they're concerned about, or should be, as they try to retain majorities in both houses of Congress. And then we look at the Republicans, how Donald Trump continues to haunt the party, causing yet another major fissure.